gentle listener, and welcome to Nocturnal Transmissions, short tales of terror performed by your humble narrator, Kristin Holland. This episode, we're very excited to be sharing another creation from the inimitable Tim Jeffries, author of Here Comes Mr. Herobone, which we featured in episode 207. Nocturnal Transmissions is proud to present The Silence of the Heart. He knocked 4 times before a light came on inside the house and the door opened, albeit only a few inches. An elderly woman looked out at him through the gap. She wore a hesitant, bewildered expression. Her voice quavered when she said, "Yes?" "Mrs. Vanessa Martin?" His use of her full name appeared to alarm her further. She withdrew a little from the gap in the door.
"That's right. Who are you? What do you want? Why are you banging on my door at this time of night?"
He drew a deep breath, glancing each way along the street. Some youths were loitering under a lamp-post at one end of it, passing a bottle between them and letting out leery, unintelligible shouts in his direction. The usual aimless thugs he'd encountered time and again. He would have liked to kick the living shit out of every one of them, one at a time or all at once. It didn't matter to him. Didn't they know they were wasting their lives, tossing them away? He faced the door again. "I'm sorry to call so late, Mrs. Martin." Reaching into the inside pocket of his jacket, he produced his ID and showed it to her. "I'm Detective Inspector Archie Jerukin of the West Yorkshire Police. I'm part of a task force investigating the shootings that happened in Dobcroft last year. You may have heard about those on the news. Can I come in?" He'd planned to put the uniform on, but had decided against it at the last moment. If there was one thing he'd learned in all his years on the force, it was this: never underestimate the public. It was possible Mrs. Martin was smart enough to know that someone of his rank was rarely required to wear a uniform, and she'd find it suspicious rather than reassuring.
"I don't know anything about those shootings,"
Mrs. Martin said.
"What are you bothering me for?"
"I'm doing routine house calls in the area."
"At this time?"
"I just need to ask you a few questions, that's all. Tick you off the list. Do you live here alone, Mrs. Martin?" Her eyes widened.
Yes, I do. Quite alone."
"I'll only take up a few minutes of your time, I promise." She hesitated, staring at him.
"I'll have to fetch my glasses, and I'll be needing to see your identification again if you don't mind."
"No problem at all."
"One moment."
The door closed. As he waited, he looked along the street again. The youths were quiet now, clustered together in the orange glow of the lamp-post. Though he couldn't make out their faces, he sensed they were watching him, probably thinking he could be their evening's entertainment. God knew there couldn't be much else to occupy them. Who, he thought, would choose to live in a place like Dobcroft, miserable little village, rain-drenched backwater surrounded by moorland in all directions? No, thank you. Give him the city any day. Give him traffic noise and bright lights, teenagers spilling out of clubs in the early hours, drunken brawls, armed robbery, stabbings, congestion, air pollution, car accidents, drug deaths, gang warfare. He'd take all of that and a heap more besides, rather than whatever went on in a place like Dobcroft. Because anything might go on here. Anything at all. Those surrounding moors gave him a feeling of desolation. Couldn't see them in the dark, thank God. But he could sense them, feel them. He turned his head the other way. He couldn't see his car either. He'd parked at the far end of the street. The dark was so full. a thick drapery of black that the street lamps hardly seemed to make much of a difference. The youths were getting leery again. He didn't look. If he ignored them, perhaps they'd fuck off somewhere else. He didn't want them hanging around as witnesses, if it turned out the old lady had lied about living alone. He glanced up at the house. No lights in the upstairs windows. It had been a few minutes since Mrs. Martin shut the door in his face. Where was she? How long did it take to fetch a pair of reading glasses? He heard noises from inside. The door opened on its chain again, and Mrs. Martin's face was once more in the gap, this time wearing a pair of large, thick-framed spectacles. She squinted at his ID when he held it up once more. "All right," she said, drawing back. He heard the rattle of the security chain, then the door opened to allow him entrance. Mrs. Martin led the way along a narrow hallway and ushered him through a door into a dimly lit living room. The TV was on with the sound turned low. Murder in Paradise, it looked like. He swept his gaze around the room. A book lay on the edge of the sofa. He noted the title, 101 Dalmatians. A bureau stood in one corner with a framed head and shoulders photograph of a child prominently displayed. A girl with dark curls, glasses, and a gap-toothed smile. Anxiously following his gaze, Mrs. Martin said,
"That's my daughter Lacey. She died when she was 8.
She pointed towards the window.
Not down that Carn Street, right outside. You never get over the loss of a child. Must be more than 30 years since it happened. But it still seems like yesterday."
Archie realized the child's death must have occurred around the time he'd first joined the force. A bright-eyed, bushy-tailed bobby on the beat, newly married to Stella, his whole life in front of him. It seemed an age ago. Very sorry for your loss.
Do you have children, Detective?
No. The certainty of his answer shocked him. Was that it, then? Had he made up his mind that Millie was dead? Finally. He heard Stella's voice in his head. "I'll never give up looking. Never. Not until I know for sure." "Your husband," he said to Mrs. Martin. "Is he—"
Glenn passed away 15 years ago. It was his liver.
Do you get many visitors to your house?"
Visitors?
"We spoke to your neighbours. They said they'd heard you talking to someone during the day and sometimes at night too." Mrs. Martin swallowed. She glanced at the left-hand wall as if she thought someone listened now on the other side of it, a glass tumbler to their ear. She spoke in lowered tones.
"Did they? Well, I expect they were just hearing the television."
"They also said they noticed you going out sometimes, very late at night." She pursed her mouth. Her face tightened. Louder, addressing the left-hand wall, she said,
"They really should learn to mind their own business."
"Why do you go out late at night, Mrs. Martin?" He thought of the youths outside, waiting like jackals under the streetlight. "This doesn't look like the kind of area where people step out for a midnight stroll."
I don't,"
Mrs. Martin said. She gave a dismissive snort.
"Why would I? They must have been mistaken. Anyway, I thought you'd come to ask about those shootings, not grill me about my comings and goings."
"Those shootings are part of a bigger narrative, Mrs. Martin. Something my task force is trying to make sense of."
"Well, I've already told you I don't know anything about those shootings, except I heard it was some young woman from down south. So perhaps you could be so kind as to leave me in peace."
"Yes, a woman who somehow managed to be in 2 places at the same time. How do you think that's possible?" She shook her head.
"It's very late and..."
She trailed off at a sound. Padding footsteps in the room above. Archie felt the hairs on his forearms prickle. He thought of the pictures in the files back at HQ, the ones from the burned-out farmhouse. Charred, twisted bodies, freakish, stretched forms caught halfway between one thing and another. Someone had set that fire deliberately with those things trapped inside. There were other files he'd looked at, files that went back decades, similarly bizarre. His heartbeat quickened. He rolled his eyes to the ceiling. Someone upstairs.
Of course there isn't. I told you I live alone.
Who's upstairs, Mrs. Martin?
No one, I told you.
I heard footsteps. We both did.
It's...
No more questions. He had to see. He left the room, heading for the stairs with her in pursuit. She shouted at him.
You can't go up there. You've no right. This is my home. Do you hear me?
What was he doing? He'd clocked off at the station hours earlier. He had no warrant, no right to be there, just as she said. He would get in trouble. It might even get him suspended from duties. Worse. And yet... He was halfway up the stairs when he realized he'd never truly believed. Even after all the briefings, even after he'd been shown those photographs from inside the burned-out farmhouse. Before they'd had a chance to sit down in the briefing room that first time, they'd been informed they were bound by the Official Secrets Act. Nothing mentioned in that room could be discussed outside of it. Even that hadn't convinced him. Not fully. These things could be everywhere. The Commissioner had told them. There could be one in every home in Dobcroft. Those gathered had looked at each other, had wanted to laugh. Was it a joke? Was this guy for real? Still, he'd done his duty, had gone house to house like the others, asking questions. A special task force, gathering evidence. Before he reached the upstairs landing, Mrs. Martin caught hold of his arm. Out of breath from the dash up the stairs, she held on to him.
Please, she said. All I ever wanted was to have my daughter back. You don't understand. You never get over the loss of a child.
He shook her off. His heart pounded now. Millie's face flashed through his mind. His legs felt like they might buckle under him as he climbed the remaining stairs. When he reached the top, he felt along the wall for a light switch. In his haste, he almost knocked over a tall, thin table standing at the head of the stairs, on which stood a large ceramic pot. He lunged for it at the last moment and set it right.
Please!
Mrs. Martin shrieked from below.
Please understand!
You're not in any trouble, he said over his shoulder. You've been deceived, that's all.
Deceived?
She said, making him halt and turn around to look at her.
I'm not a total fool, you know. It was a comfort. That's all.
There were 3 doors off the landing. Only one was closed, so he instinctively knew to look inside that room. He was even more certain when he tried the door handle and found it locked. He twisted around. Mrs. Martin had remained on the staircase, staring at him through the spindles of the banister. Where's the key?
That was Lacey's room. I've kept it just the way it was the day she died.
Where's the key?
If you had children of your own, you'd understand.
Where's the... Never mind. Before he had time to stop himself, before he had time to question his actions, he took a step backwards, then gave the door a hard kick. The lock splintered and the door flew open without further resistance. The room beyond was in darkness. As he reached around the door frame for a light switch, he was suddenly aware of a presence inside the room. His fingers hesitated. They'll be impersonating loved ones, the Commissioner had said that day in the briefing room. Lost children, errant husbands, estranged wives, maybe even a much-missed pet. Archie felt the light switch under his fingertips, but he didn't flick it. Despite all his previous doubts, his disbelief, he was certain of what he'd see when he switched on that light. It was the girl, the child from the picture on the mantel downstairs. A girl who couldn't be. The curly-haired girl with glasses and a gap-toothed smile. She'd look just as she did in that picture, the same way she'd looked before being hit by a car in the street outside. Untouched by the 30-odd years that had passed since. He wondered what kind of expression she'd wear. Would she smile sweetly at him, trying to convince him, the way she'd convinced Mrs. Martin, that a child, long buried, could still somehow be? When he tried to imagine this, it was Millie's face he saw smiling sweetly. He realized then that he hadn't fully admitted to himself why he'd gone to that house. Why he'd gone alone after clocking off, risking a suspension or worse. Probably worse. Most likely it was his career he was risking, his entire career. But if there was a chance, some possibility, however small, that all that talk in the briefing room was true, and if it was, what was it he'd been thinking to do? Get that thing? Make it become Millie? Take it home to Stella? And why? Why? Was it because he knew in his heart that Millie was dead? Had always known. Didn't they say that any missing person not found after a month probably never would be found? At least, not alive. And it had been 9 years. Had he always known that there was no point going back to that island over and over again, searching, following every lead, however slim? Never again did he want to hear Stella say in that heartbroken and accusatory voice, "You're a police detective, why can't you find her?" God, he loved her, would do anything for her. And if she couldn't accept, if this was what it took to see the suffering, the anguish gone from her face, to see the lines soften, to see her smile again, really smile, well, it was what he'd do. And if that meant risking his career and giving up on Millie, hardening his heart, well, at least he could have his wife back. At least he could have Stella. It was Stella's face he pictured in his mind now. Stella smiling, genuinely, joyfully, as he said to her, "Look, Stella, I found her. I did it. I found her." Then something crashed down hard on his head, and he saw only blackness. Cold roused him. Opening his eyes, he winced at the pain in his crown. Something was fastened around his head, covering his mouth so that his groans were muffled. His arms were locked behind his back. When he tried to move them, he couldn't. Slowly, he realized he lay on his side in what appeared to be a child's bedroom. And he was cold, because he'd been stripped, naked. He tried again to move his arms. No, couldn't. They were bound together at the wrist. Glancing down, he saw that his ankles, too, had been bound with what appeared to be a skipping rope. For a few moments he struggled, hollering against the gag. "Hush," Mrs. Martin's voice.
"It's no use."
She was perched on the neatly made single bed stood against the opposite wall. The duvet on the bed had pictures of the Powerpuff Girls. His eyes swept the remainder of the room, looking for the child, or that thing that impersonated the child. But they were alone, he and Mrs. Martin. The door to the room stood open, and in the hallway beyond he saw scattered fragments of the pot, the one he'd almost knocked from its perch earlier. She must have picked it up and smashed it over his head while he stood in the doorway hesitating over the light switch and imagining his wife smiling for the first time in 9 years. But why had she stripped him naked and bound and gagged him? Someone must have helped her. A woman of her age couldn't have done all that alone. Mrs. Martin cocked her head as she looked at him. She sighed.
"I knew this day would come," she said. "It told me it can't be my Lacey anymore. I have to let her go."
He screamed against the gag, jerking his body, but she appeared not to notice. She rested her chin in one hand, sighed again. Her eyes were misty, far away. "Why?" he wanted to yell at her. "Why are you doing this?" She met his eyes.
"I didn't want to be alone, you see. Can you understand that, Mr. Policeman? It's terrible to see yourself getting old, all alone. I knew from the start, though, that I'd have to keep her hidden. How do you explain a child returned from the grave, and how she never aged a day? How do you explain that? We could still do all the things Lacey and I used to do, like go to the playground, play on the swings, but we had to do it when it was dark out, when no one was around. After a while, the mind just accepts things."
Beyond her voice, Archie heard the sound of feet on the stairs. They sounded too heavy to be the footsteps of a child. Fear began to well up inside him. Mrs. Martin was still talking, but it had become a burble against the approaching footsteps, and the sound of his own pulse pounding in his ears. A shadow fell across the floor of the hallway outside the door. Then a man entered the room. Archie's mind began to unravel. He screamed again. He realized then why they'd gagged him. Those neighbors, those nosy fucking neighbors with the glass tumblers to their ears. The man stood over him. He was tall and stooped. He looked to be in his 50s, but the deep lines in his face and his prematurely white hair aged him. He was dressed in Archie's clothes, rumpled grey suit and unironed shirt. He even wore Archie's lace-ups. Mrs. Martin handed the man the pillow from the bed on which she sat. Powerpuff Girl's pillowcase. Crouching beside Archie, the man gripped it with a hand at either end. He remained silent. He hadn't spoken a word since entering the room. Then his mouth opened, and his lips moved as if to offer some words of consolation. And Archie knew his mind would snap if he heard his own voice coming out of this other man's mouth. Thankfully, instead, it was Mrs. Martin who spoke.
"Don't struggle, Detective. It won't hurt for long."
As the man lowered the pillowcase towards his face, Archie began to writhe and struggle. He saw what would happen. Once he was dead, they would dispose of his body somehow, and then this man, this imposter, this thing that somehow looked exactly like him, right down to the beaten-down look on his face. This man would take his keys and get in his car. He would drive to his house and let himself in. Stella would be in bed by the time he arrived, but he would lean over and kiss her sleeping cheek. Then he would undress and climb into bed beside her. In the morning, when she woke, Stella would have no idea that it was a stranger who lay beside her in bed. She might, over time, notice something different in his mood or his attitude. Perhaps he would be gentler with her, comforting, more tolerant. But she wouldn't think too much of it, wouldn't know that this man was not her husband, that it was, in fact, some thing from off the moors. Some monster. Like Mrs. Martin said, after a while, the mind just accepts things. He had no fear of death. God knew there'd been times over the past 9 years when he would have welcomed it. What scared him, right down to his very core, was the thought of Stella, alone with this thing that she thought was her husband, not knowing. No, his mind couldn't accept that, and he wished there was a way he could send her his thoughts. He would send her his thoughts so that she could know how much he loved her, how much he'd always loved her, and how he would have spent the rest of his life searching for their lost daughter if that's what she wanted. She was right not to give up hope. He would tell her that. She was right. It was he who had given up. He, because he was weak. Because giving up was easier. And what he would have liked Stella to know, most of all, was that he didn't give up. Not then, lying naked on the floor, bound and gagged, while a pillow was pressed to his face. He would have liked her to know that one thing. How much he fought and struggled until the final breath. The Silence of the Heart by Tim Jeffries. You have been listening to a transmission from Nocturnal Transmissions. If you would like more, our back catalogue awaits you. If that doesn't prove to be enough, please consider subscribing through Patreon, where you'll find heaps of exclusive episodes featuring some of our very favorite tales. Oh, we love sharing spooky stories with you, fellow weirdos, and it is our Patreon subscribers we have to thank for helping us to make that possible. Thank you, Patreon subscribers, especially you cohorts, our most esteemed supporters of all. Jerry Taylor, Tim Howard, Tippy Polo, Johnny Kelly, Robert Troy Hampton Peterson, Bull Swivney, Kel Wielden, Doug Standish, Trenny, Evan Dooley, Daniel Kanyankowski, Alex Brewis, Wayne Prince, Heathen Soul, and Amanda Moore. And now we must away. Until next time, as always, watch the skies, fear the dark, and don't trust anyone, especially yourself. Good night, gentle listener.
Every day means just another day for friends to meet. Every day brings someone shadows round you creep, then that's the time to say good night and close your eyes in sleep. In sleep. Good night, good night. I'll see you in the morning. Good night, good night. I'll see